Hello and welcome to another training session. Now today once more we're going to be taking a look at Excel, but today we're going to be taking a look underneath the facade. In other words, what's under the skin of Excel, because what you see is not what's really there. So sometimes when you have a mask on top of what's there, it's quite easy to see through the mask and see what's really there. So when you peel away the mask, well, there's no big surprise, that's what you thought was there. But sometimes when you peel away the mask, it's not really what you thought at all. So why do we care? What's this got to do with Excel? Well, the main thing is what you see is not what's there. What you see is the mask in the sheet. So you're just looking at a facade of what's behind the scenes. You're not seeing what's really there. Now, as an Excel user, you should be familiar with what is actually there so that you can then choose how you do display the thing that's there. This might be for simplicity, for clarity, or to reinforce your own position or point of view. So let's have a look behind the mask of Excel. Now, what are we looking at here? Well, let's go into Excel and we'll have a look for ourselves. So here we are in Excel, and in cell B2, it looks like the number 10 is in that cell. But can we be sure? Now, the place to look is not the cell itself. The place to look is the formula bar. If you look up there and it says 10, then that's probably what is in the cell. I'm going to click up here in the formula bar, and that puts me into edit mode, and you can see this down in the lower left hand corner. I could have also gone there by pressing F2 on my keyboard. Now this tells me that the number that's in that cell is the number 10, so I press enter and that's fine. Now what about this one? It looks like it says 10, but actually when I go to the formula bar it says 9.5, and when I click there again it says 9.5. Now how can this be? Why did it show me 10 when it's got 9.5 in the cell? Well, the simple thing is, all I did was I formatted it to no decimal places. So if I press escape and then put a decimal place back on there, you'll see that the 9.5 had been rounded up to 10. 9.5 is 10 to no decimal places. But that doesn't mean the number 10 is in that cell. Just because I see the number 10, it doesn't change the number 9.5 being in that cell, and if I do maths on that cell, it will still be showing me the answer on the 9.5. So let's have a look at that. Here, I'm going to say this equals that cell times 2, and it tells me 19, not 20. Okay, what about the cell below? Well, if I click on there, again, it's showing me 10 in the cell. But in the formula bar, it's showing me apostrophe 10. Now what that means is it's the text 10, not the number 10. So this is text rather than a number. Now why does that matter? Well, because I don't do maths on text, I only do maths on numbers. Now this is not always true, as I'll show you later on. Now watch what happens when I press enter now, because as soon as I press enter it's going to reevaluate the cell and it's going to say, hang on a minute, you put it in as though it were text, but you then put in a number anyway. So it's telling me that I've made a mistake, and if I go back there, it's telling me that I've got a number stored as text. Now all I'm going to do is say, ignore this error. But why would we want to do that anyway? Why would we want to store a number as text? Well, it might be that we're storing a phone number. There might be a part number or a serial number. There are lots of numbers that we as humans use which we don't want to do maths on. So I don't want to do maths on phone numbers. I don't want to do maths on serial numbers. So that, for us, is the difference. Anything that we want to do maths on, we must make sure it's stored as a number. Anything that we don't want to must be stored as text. What about the next one down? Well, this one is actually 5 plus 5. So this is a simple formula, and we know that 5 plus 5 equals 10. So when I press enter, I don't see the formula in that cell. I see the answer to the formula. So the mask, the facade, is showing me the answer to the formula. Now what I can do is I can do Control Grav, and that will show me all of the things behind the mask rather than the mask itself. But Control Grav again, I think you'll agree this is actually what we want to see rather than all the stuff behind it. Next cell down, something similar, except rather than having hard-coded 5 plus 5, this has references to 2 hidden cells over here. So I'll just unhide that column so we can see the values in those cells. And that was the 5 and the 5 as well. Now let's have a look at the cell below. And again, this, rather than having a formula in it, it has just a simple reference. Now the great thing about those 2 cells there that have the formula in them, because they're using a reference, if these references change, then the cells themselves will update. So the formula, the answer to the formula will update every time the sheet recalculates. What about the cell below there? So what's in that cell there? Well, again, that looks like 10. And in this case, it is 10. However, I can make it look like there's nothing in this cell. Because if I change the color of the font to be white, or the same as the background color, I might look at it and say, well, hang on a minute, there's nothing in that cell. But just because you see nothing in the cell, unless you click on the formula bar and have a look there, you're not going to know what's actually in that cell. So even though it looks like there's nothing in that cell, actually the number 10 is in that cell. And again, I can do a formula here. So this equals that one that looks empty times 2, and this time it does come back with 20. Now, what's in cell B9? So between 8 and 10, you'll see that there's a hidden cell or filtered out row. Now, let's have a look and see how we can do this by simply clicking on a cell and saying this equals B9. And lo and behold, that cell also has the value 10 in it. Now, just because we can't see it doesn't mean we can't refer to it and use the value. So the facade might be to completely hide it. It might be a cloak of invisibility. So that is how we see it, not at all, but what's really there is still the value that's there. Okay, what about this one here? It looks like it's got the value 10 in it, 10%. But 10% is not 10. 10% is 0.1, so it's 1/10 of a whole. So the whole of something is 100% of that thing. So 10% is 1/10 of that whole one thing. Now, this is confusing because if I delete what's in that cell, actually, that's not been completely deleted. All I did was press delete on my keyboard, which just clears the contents. And the content of that cell was 0.1. The formatting of that cell was show this as a percentage. In other words, the mask was show it as a percentage. That's still there. So if I type in 10, it's now going to go in as 10% because I have the percentage already formatted on that cell. That is not 10, that is 0.1. What about this one here? What's actually in that cell? So if you've been following along so far, you're looking in the right place. You're already looking up here at the formula bar, and you're seeing that it's got 9.5 in there. And what's probably happened is I've formatted it to no decimal places. That's why we're seeing 10. And you'd be absolutely right if that's what you thought. Watch what happens now if I type in 10. Boom. It's now formatted as a percentage. So that is what 10 looks like as a percentage. So 1 is 100%. So 10 is 100%, which is 1,000%. But how did it do that? How did it format it as percentage when it got to 10, whereas before when it was 9.5, it showed me as 10, but it wasn't formatted as a percentage? And the reason is because that number there is 9.5. 9.5 displayed to no decimal places is 10, but the number itself is still 9.5. Now what I have on this cell is I have some conditional formatting so that as soon as the value is actually in reality 10, it then displays it as a percentage. So the condition is that the value equals 10 and the formatting is as a percentage. Okay, so there's some quick basics on the facade and what's really behind the facade. But how is this of any use to us? Well, let's scroll down and take a look at some other things. So I'm going to start typing in my name there and press enter. Now the machine, as soon as I press enter, will look at the value that was typed into that cell and do some analysis on it. And the analysis will return the fact that that is text. So it's gone to the left hand side of the screen and it's left it as it is formatted as text. Now what it hasn't done is made it left aligned. It's just made it left aligned by default because that's the analysis the machine's done on it. What about if I type in a number? So I'm going to start typing in a phone number 01483 and press enter. Now the machine has instantly recognized this as a number, so it's done two things this time. It's moved it to the right hand side and it's taken off the leading 0, because I don't need leading zeros on numbers. If I have the number 01, it's the same as 1. So the number itself is 1, whether I have a 0 in front of it or not. So it's taken off the 0, but I don't want this, because actually with a phone number I do want the 0 there. So what I have to do is something different. If I type an apostrophe before I type the number in, 01483, as soon as I press enter, the computer leaves it as text and leaves it on the left hand side, but it's clever enough to understand that even though I told it I was going to type in some text, I then typed in a number. So I can come over here and look at the error, and it tells me the error is that I've got a number stored as text, and I'm going to say ignore the error. Now why does that matter? Why would I even want to store a number as text? Why would I want a number stored as a number? Well, the simple reason is maths. If I want to do maths on something, I must have it stored as a number. Now that's not always true, not 100% true. I'll explain later an example. But for most of what you need to realize, a number, if I don't want to do maths, I'll store it as text. Now, I don't normally do it that way. I normally do it a different way. So I'm going to say, set the formatting for this empty cell to text. And now I'm going to type in my phone number and press enter. And again, it does exactly the same. It tells me, hang on, that's a number stored as text. And again, I'm just going to say, ignore the error. Now, why would I do one and not the other? Well, it's all to do with outputting this to other programs. Now, if I output that one to some other program which reads text, it might well look at that as being apostrophe 01483. Whereas this one here, it doesn't have the apostrophe. So they look and behave exactly the same in Excel, but when I output them to other programs, I don't want the apostrophe in those other programs, particularly if it's going to be using something like a phone dialer. I don't want to be dialing an apostrophe. Okay, let's have a look at something else now. So I've just done Control semicolon and press enter. Control semicolon tells the computer to come down here and have a look and see what today's date is. And it then puts that value in the cell. And when I press enter, what it does is it formats it to the right hand side. Now we've already seen that the thing that goes to the right hand side is numbers. Now why do numbers go to the right? Why do we need to know that they're numbers? Well, because then we can do maths on them, and that's exactly why we want dates to be recorded as numbers, so that we can do maths on them. Now actually, this in the background of Excel is being stored as a number. It's been temporarily formatted or automatically formatted as a what's called a short date or a date. And if I take off the formatting, so if I clear the formats, you'll see the actual number behind that date. So there's the number behind today's date. And let's have a look at how that number is created. So I've typed the number 1 into a cell. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and format that as a date. And we see that the number 1 is the 1st of January 1900. So the first day of the last century. Now since then, we've had 120 years. So if I format that one back as a date, we've had 120 years and nearly halfway through the year. So in another 15 days, we'll be exactly halfway through the year. So let's do some simple maths here. 365 and a quarter and 120.5 years. And now let's just down here, let's say this equals that one times that one. And it shows us 44,012. Now, if I take off the formatting off that one, remember I said it was in 15 days time? Well, 3 days there brings it up to 44, plus the 12 is 15. So we're not even a half a day out. And actually that 0.5 is because we're halfway through today. If I look down there, I'll see I'm just over halfway through. So I'm actually 0.6 of the way through today's date. Okay, so what does this all mean? Well, actually, it's very important because we do want dates to be recorded as numbers because we do want to do maths on them. So let's imagine that that date there wasn't actually the number 1. It wasn't the 1st of January 1900. So let's imagine it was the 25th of December, which happens to be Christmas Day. Now, can I do maths on this? Well, yes, of course I can. I can say that this cell here equals Christmas minus today, and I press enter, and I've got 193 days to go before Christmas. Now, that's okay, but the other thing that we can do is we can, rather than typing in an actual date, which is hard-coded into that cell, we could do another command, which is a function. And the function does something every time the computer refreshes the calculations or recalculates. Now, instead of putting in the date, I'm going to put in a function which is equals today. Now, as soon as I start typing in the function, it suggests what it thinks I mean. So any recognized functions will come up there. And if I press tab, it accepts the one that was in blue. And if I then press enter, it puts in today's date. Now the difference here is that cell contains the function. Doesn't contain the hard-coded date like it did before. So if I save this file and open it tomorrow, as soon as it recalculates, it will look down here and say what is the date. And tomorrow's date will be the 16th. So it will say the 16th. And this will say 192. So every day, this will now count down to my target date. So that is why we need dates formatted as numbers, why in fact we need the number behind them so that the machine can work out maths on dates. Okay, that was a very quick look at what's going on behind the scenes when you type something into Excel, and to try and get you not to assume that you can see what's actually in Excel, because in a lot of cases you're not seeing what's actually there. You're seeing the answer to a formula or a function, or sometimes you're seeing something formatted in a different way to the number that's actually there. Now this can have big implications if you look at numbers where you've got whole numbers of pounds or dollars, but actually behind the scenes you've got the fractional amounts with the pennies or the cents. So the maths that you do in your head on a couple of numbers will not match what you see at the bottom when you see the totals. So do be aware of things like that. If you did want to do the maths on the actual whole numbers of pounds, you'd need to use a rounding function and tell it to round up or round down, so that then when you sum them up, you're doing the maths on the rounded number, which is the number that's displayed, rather than the number including the pennies or cents. Okay, well, I hope that's been useful for you guys. Thank you for watching, and once more, If it's been useful for you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click down below, and thank you for your time.